I invited you today to talk about Fusion and Workstation, and I know many of our listeners have been fans of the products for ages, and we've got some awesome news to share. But before we do, it's probably good to give a brief explanation of what our desktop hypervisor offering actually is, because some of the listeners may be new and may have not heard of the offering itself. So maybe you can go over that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we talk about desktop hypervisor, it's very similar in how we talk about vSphere in relation to ESX, right? So desktop hypervisor is sort of our product group. And within there, we have Workstation and Fusion. Workstation stretches its roots back to the very beginning of the company. I'm just sitting here with a box right now, VMware Workstation for Linux 1.0. And that was shipped in 1999. And so, that functionality, the shared code with our enterprise software has always been there since the very beginning. And so we've had a lot of changes over the years. We've been, swizzling how we go to market, how we organize the products from a use case perspective. But ultimately, it's all about running virtual machines on a PC or Mac. So Workstation is Windows and Linux, PC, and then we have Fusion, which came out when Apple switched to the Intel processors in like 2005, 2006. And so then basically Fusion is like Workstation ported over to the Mac operating system with the native Mac interface. And so, you run Windows on the Mac, you run Linux on Windows, Windows on Linux, and for all kinds of reasons, whether you're trying to do some work and using those Microsoft productivity tools, or if you're using Linux, sandbox, containers, you're studying virtual machines, it's a great place to learn. And, a lot of folks, when I go out and I talk to the community, most folks, the very first VMware product that they ever put their hands on was Workstation.
Yeah, I think it was the same for me. The very first time I actually touched anything related to VMware, it was Workstation. Now, like you said, it's probably the same for a lot of customers. And the first time they actually want to use it, they may ended up using an eval license or whatever it is for Workstation. But I'm guessing a lot of our customers also ended up buying it. Now, that's probably one of the first things we should be talking about. If you look at the people that are using it for commercial use, I think there's going to be some changes introduced, or changes have been announced just now. So maybe you can talk us through the changes that we are seeing for the commercial use of VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion.
Yeah, sure. So Workstation and Fusion Pro are commercial products. They, historically have sold for, Workstation was at one point $250 for a new license. I was able to reduce it to $199 and align that with Fusion. So Fusion and Workstation are the same price, $199 for that perpetual license. And that's version. So when we release version 12, 13, 14, 15, each of those requires a new license. And so there was like an upgrade SKU, it was cheaper, but it was perpetual, and that was how we sort of went to market with it. So in the new world, we're moving to subscription. So should be of no surprise to anybody, but we're changing the price around a little bit. So we're coming in at $119 per year. And basically what that gives you is full functionality out of the Pro products, and for the duration of your term. So as we ship major updates, folks who have that active subscription will be able to upgrade to the newest version without having to pay any additional upgrade fees or tacking on any add-on SNS type of orders, which is how we did things previously. So before, you would buy your license, and then if you had to pay to upgrade again, or you paid extra for this sort of support and subscription, kind of like an insurance, if you will. And that way, if we released a new version while your term was active, you could just go ahead and upgrade it. We're basically merging all of that into one product with a cheaper price. So that $119 is going to include the same thing that SNS plus license gave you before. So for the duration of your term, you get all those upgrades as well as access to support.
Oh, we mentioned SNS.
Of course, the license to use it in a commercial setting. That's the big thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned SNS, and that's probably one of the questions I also had is, so those who had a perpetual license in the past and still have active SNS, how does that actually work for them?
Well, interestingly, nothing changes for existing customers. So, the products won't suddenly implode. The term of your SNS will continue to be honored, and it's effectively the same thing. So what ends up happening is when it comes to the renewal, normally you would just go and renew the SNS. Now you'll need to just transition to the subscription SKU.
Now, the other thing we spoke about just now was the desktop hypervisor, but they are two different products today, VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion. Now, from a licensing perspective, how does that actually work?
Yeah, so we've been on a journey there too. And so, Fusion and Workstation were differently priced for a while. And we sort of, brought them down and aligned, brought down Workstation, brought up Fusion, made them aligned. We also made the licenses portable in that, if you bought a bunch of Fusion licenses, but you were suddenly Macs are no good, we needed to transition to Intel machines or PCs, you could just take those Fusion keys and put them into Workstation, they would activate. And so we had terms in our license to already do that for some time. Now going forward, we actually only have one SKU. And so when you buy the SKU, it's, VCF, Artivision, DH, Desktop Hypervisor, Pro. And that VCF DH Pro SKU applies for both Workstation Pro and Fusion Pro. So that will give you a key which will unlock both products or either product. You still have the same number of entitlements. It's not like you get, one on Mac, Windows, and Linux with your one key. You still need to have one license per installation in a commercial setting, but that one product SKU will facilitate all of that. So it really simplifies our sort of buying process with this notion that we've been taking called radical simplification. So we had like 70 SKUs, if you can imagine, even for our tiny little products, but all the way down to one. And so it should be super easy for folks to transact going forward.
Yeah, when I was doing the research for this recording, I looked at the list indeed of the SKUs, and I was surprised about it. I mean, I know Workstation, of course, I know Fusion, and I would expect maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 SKUs at most, potentially 8. But the list was extremely long, and that was really surprising. I can imagine that for the team, this is going to be much easier.
Yeah, no longer you not worry about academic versus federal versus SNS versus per incident. There was just so much complexity, and so this really simplifies it and should be nice, clean, smooth sailing going forward.
Now, the other thing that also changes is, from a product perspective, something around VMware Fusion Player and VMware Workstation Player. And I've used it in the past quite frequently, but I think there's also some changes around that in that space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Player was our sort of free product. You could also license it for commercial use if you needed to use one of these products in a commercial environment. In the Fusion side, you would have to register. So it was both licensed for personal use and for commercial use. So you'd either buy a license for it at a slightly less rate than the Pro versions, or you would sign up for a Player license, like a personal use license. And so the Player as a product tier is going away. We're no longer going to be selling the Player tier of products. And as a result, the downloads for those are going to be unavailable for folks unless you've already bought them. So if you have bought Fusion Player, Workstation Player as a commercial user, those are going to still show up in your Broadcom account once the transition is complete. And so there should be no changes there. But going forward, those products are not going to be offered anymore. So I know a lot of our users are going to feel, some pain by that, but I've got a good story for them going forward, which is, to spoil it here, the Pro products are actually going to be licensed in the same way. So what that means is that whereas before you could get Fusion Player for free and Workstation Player for free, now you can get Fusion Pro for free and Fusion Workstation Pro for free for personal use. So if you're using it in a commercial environment for work, you have to buy that license. But if you're using it at home, you're learning, you're a student, you're working on your home lab, whatever, you're doing it for not work-related reasons, then you can absolutely use those products. You can just download them. The license keys are going to be baked into them. So we're shipping an update for second-ish week of May, give or take, that will facilitate that. And so by default, when you install Fusion Pro or Workstation Pro, they're going to be licensed for personal use. And so there's some Chrome on it in the same way that Player works today that says, hey, this product is licensed for personal use, not commercial use. And so that's one of the differences between the commercial versus the personal use license. But otherwise, there's no limitations. There's no time bomb. There's no expiry. It just will work, and you can use that to your leisure.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It's probably one of the announcements that had me most excited, especially because I know a lot of people will benefit from this. One of my friends recently pinged me, and he said, could you get me one of those Fusion licenses? I said, well, just wait a couple of weeks. We'll have some great news for you. So we'll make sure that we've got you covered. I think that is fantastic. And as you said, especially people with a home lab that just want to play around with one or two virtual machines, want to test out some weird Linux flavor, and don't want to reformat their own machine. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's fantastic. I don't know how he did it, but yeah, kudos to you. Awesome.
It was a little bit of backflipping, but we have a lot of support from leadership. These products stretching all the way back from the very beginning. There's a lot of shared code. So there's a lot of incentive for us to make sure that the platform is robust and solid, right? Both performant as well as accuracy, like not crashing and doing the right thing from presenting a virtual hardware. And so, that's a hugely valuable thing for us. And one of the reasons why Workstation has had so much staying power is that we have this scale that we can address issues within Workstation, or let me rephrase, when we see issues within Workstation, we can address them, and then that solves that problem before it even makes its way into ESX, right? And so there's a lot of things that we do, for example, on the graphics side of the house. We push the envelope there and we make that super performant. So that way when vSphere adopts these new graphics stacks that we're innovating, it's ironed out all the bugs effectively. And so either, as well as from just the technology perspective, just those users telling us all these different use cases, the various things that they do, it helps us inform our decision-making process, even to the point of hardware. When we can see, for example, via our opt-in telemetry, the type of generations of CPUs people have on their desktops, we can see the sort of pace of adoption and the evolution of that. And so that helps us inform our data center decisions, right? Like right now, we're seeing on the desktop a lot of folks using P&E cores. A lot of CPUs are coming along with it. I just built an i9 machine down here, and it's got 24 cores, 16 performance, and 8 efficiency cores. And, that's cool, but there's some weird complications with that when stuff gets accidentally dropped onto an efficiency core. So us being able to address that problem there before those things start showing up at the data center really puts us in a good position. So it really just helps lift all the boats. And this is a thing that, it's going to be great for the community, folks who are trying to get started with VMware who don't have access to an ESXi license. I mean, it's not ESX, but absolutely on a Linux host, on a Windows machine, and on an Intel Mac, you can run vSphere nested and do everything that you need to do to get certified for VCP. And then once you've got your VCP certification, then, a lot of new channels open up for you there. So yeah, I'm thrilled we were able to get it through. I think it's a great thing for the community. But at the same time, we're making sure that these products remain funded, because if we don't have that funding, these products just, unfortunately, would eventually go away, right? They need to have a sustainable revenue channel attached to them, right? And so the way we felt that it made the most sense was, hey, organizations get a ton of value out of this, but we also want to have the scale out of the communities, both diversity of use cases and as well as diversity of hardware. And so, we were able to get a plan together that seemed to satisfy both of those. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think in this way you actually have best of both worlds, in my opinion. Free for personal use, and then I wouldn't say it's cheap, but it's relatively cheap for commercial use, in my honest opinion, especially if you compare it to some of the other solutions out there that I've wanted to license in the past. Now, one of the things that we probably should talk about is how that actually works from a support perspective when it is being used for personal use. Is there any type of support that you can leverage, or how would one go about getting some kind of support in the future?
It's a good question. So beforehand, when it's the same as before in that you get community level support, right, with the personal use products. We are doing a bit of a transition with our community forum platform right now. So there's a new community within Broadcom's community site that will be opened up for self-help community support for Fusion Workstation under the desktop hypervisor group. There's no changes there. For commercial customers, now you get the support baked into your product, so you don't have to additionally subscribe to that SNS in order to get that support, to be able to call the folks and get help with it, whether it's licensing or technical. And so there's a bunch of escalation paths directly that honestly they end up in my desk at some point if it goes too far. But so we're still here. I'm still doing all the forum moderation, so I'm kind of one of the community admins over there. And so there's going to be a bit of some squeaky wheels as we do this transition. We're talking about migrating hundreds of thousands of users into our new community forum, right? So, but that being said, it's a great place for the community to help itself. There's been so much stuff that was already solved in there that folks could just search and find the answers to most problems that, pretty much any user has ever encountered. But going forward, that's going to continue to be available. And we're actually going to be doubling down and having more moderation and more employee participation inside of those forums as well. So look forward to that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we've seen it with some of the other products where we get GSS people directly involved. So for vCent, for instance, there's a GSS person on the forum as well. But we've also had some of the developers actually roaming around on the forum trying to figure out what customers are doing, what some of our users are doing, and how they've been using it and why they've been using it in a particular way. So that's also one of the reasons they they go to the forum. So yeah, I agree with you. It's probably the best way going forward. Now, the other thing that you mentioned is that we've been using the desktop hypervisor for some of our innovation when it comes to the data center product. Is that something that going forward we're also still planning on doing? And I can understand if you don't want to talk about futures, because that is also always a sensitive topic, but going forward, will we still be doing that?
Yeah, that's not going away. The integration with, vCenter, and ESXi hosts, being able to access those from Workstation and Fusion, that's still there. And that's awesome now, because now the personal use folks will have access to that, And so we look at the product from an innovation perspective is, we're going to be more aligned with vSphere and what we're doing on the VCF, VVF side of the house now, as opposed to being more aligned with end user computing. So we're not part of the end user computing group. We left that group in, I want to say 2018, 2017, around that point. And we basically came home. We went into the vSphere team. And so we share all this code, but the use cases were always a little bit different, right? You're running Windows on a Mac. It's not exactly a data center thing, right? So going forward, the way that we look at the products is really about that learning lab and that sort of local sandbox, that local virtual sandbox where, like I said, if you're learning about operating systems, you're learning about IT from the ground up, or you're learning VMware, all that's going to be a lot more accessible to folks. And so, yeah, that's where we're going to, I think, focus a lot of our innovation. How do we continue to tie up the relationship between what's happening in the data center and what's happening in the desktop? I'll lean a little bit forward and see where I see some of the areas of innovation that we might want to think about. And this is kind of pie in the sky, but, the idea that we have all this library of content inside of vSphere, how do we make that accessible to Workstation and Fusion? How do we make it so that if you build a template in vSphere, you can run it on your local machine to make sure that it's all good? And then, okay, cool, now we can push that back to the data center. Or for a whole bunch of other reasons, right? Maybe you're just a developer who's testing some application. You need to get like a instance of it in your local machine. And so we look at basically how do we tie the stories of vSphere and Workstation and Fusion together and through the lens of that local lab. And that's whether you're doing dev, QA, or your network admin, your learning, all of that sort of fits into the same bucket of that local virtual sandbox.
Awesome. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, I guess thanks for a fantastic episode. I think this is amazing news. And before we wrap it up, do you have any famous last words or anything you would like to plug?
I guess what I'll say is what we've been doing on the VMUG side of the house has been pretty exciting. And so I'm going to be doing a desktop hypervisor presentation to VMUG come August, which is going to be pretty cool. And so stay tuned there because we'll have a release coming out pretty shortly around VMware Explore, and we'll be able to talk about that. I'm hoping to make a presence at VMware Explore with the hackathon. And so we'll see what happens there. It's still early days. Call for papers has only kind of just went up. So we'll see how that goes. But, I think overall, it's been a struggle. We've had a lot of challenges, both in terms of VMware as a company and our product group within it. But from here forward, it looks like bright skies, my friend. Like we've renewed investment. We've got support from leadership all the way from the top. And it's, it's never quite looked this nice for us. I'll say that. So I'm thrilled with what we're going to be having in store. I think that, the release this year is going to have a lot of features that folks are been really wanting to see, particularly on the Apple side of the house with this transition to Apple Silicon. There was a lot of stuff that didn't quite make it all the way there. And we cleaned a lot of that up in 13.5, where now with Fusion, you can download Windows right from within it. So you can click button, click button, downloads the ISO, injects all our drivers into it, click button, you get Windows. So we've done a lot of effort to make it a lot easier to use. So with the investment that we've been given and the sort of renewed outlook on our place within the division, like no longer are we just sort of this like afterthought. Now we're very much in the center of this, whole whirlwind of change. So we're just thrilled with where it's going to take us.